Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à notre leçon de Learn French avec Madame. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Learn French with Madame. Aujourd'hui, on va parler au sujet du subjonctif avec les irréguliers. So this lesson, we're going to talk about the subjunctive and the irregulars in the subjunctive. In our last lesson, we talked about what the subjunctive was and how to conjugate the regular verbs. But this lesson, I want to do a review of the subjunctive and then talk about the irregulars. All right, so let's just go ahead and start. The first thing I want to do is review the subjunctive. So let's start off with defining what exactly is the subjunctive. So the subjunctive is used to express a couple of different things. I like to use the acronym WEIRDO. So I know it might not be very nice, but I like to use the expression weirdo. Okay, and so let's fill out our acronym with what it means. So first thing we're going to use is the W, and the W stands for wants, wishes. So we're going to write wants and wishes. The next one is for emotion, for E, emotion. I is used for expressions, like interpersonal expressions, like in person. So we're going to write impersonal expressions. R stands for requests and recommendations, requirements. So I'm going to just write requests, recommendations. I'm going to abbreviate that. And the last one is requirements. I'll abbreviate that one too. Our D stands for doubts and demands and denials. D stands for doubts, demands, and denials. Doubts is your biggest one. And the O stands for opinions. I know this looks like a big list, so I'm going to write out two main things. If you can remember to use the subjunctive with necessity and obligation, that is going to pretty much cover most of those. So necessity and obligation. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is some key phrases that will trigger the subjunctive. So once you see these phrases, there's of course more than we're going to list, but once you see these phrases, you're going to know that the second part of your sentence is in the subjunctive. So these are the key phrases. Okay, our key phrases that we talked about were il faut que, il est nécessaire que, and il est important que. So we have one must, or it's necessary, or it's important. Okay, all three of those plus some other ones are going to trigger the subjunctive. So once you see those three plus those other ones, it's going to trigger the subjunctive. Your main hint is when you see que, the next part should be in the subjunctive. So if you see any phrase that looks kind of similar to these, the next part will be the subjunctive. So let's talk about how we form it. So the formation that we talked about was you need the present tense, il form, minus the ENT, so drop your ENT, and then you add these new endings. So we add es, eons, eoz, and ent. So everything inside the boot are present tense endings, and new and vu are the imperfect endings. All right, let's talk about some irregulars. We're not learning all of the irregulars in the subjunctive, but we are going to learn quite a few. I want to talk about two groups, essentially. So I'm going to move my paper up so that we can see it all. But there's two main groups. So there's one group that has two stems, and then there's one group that has all different stems. Okay, so let's talk about the two stem ones first. These ones have two stems for different subjects. So two stems. Our first one is the verb boire. And boire starts off, I'm going to just draw these little charts because I feel like that will be helpful. So boire starts off with B-O-I-V for the eel plural stem for everything in the boot. And then new and vu get something a little bit different. They get the new form, B-U-V. All right, our second verb that has two stems is the verb devoir. And devoir has kind of the same stems, but a little bit different. Just a little spelling change. So we've got D-O-I-V for everything inside the boot. And then new and vu get the new stem, D-E-V. All right, our last two stem verb is venir. Venir gets via for the boot verbs or the boot subjects. And then for the new and the vu form, they get ven. Okay, so those are all of our two stem verbs for the subjunctive that we're learning. The next ones are all verbs that are very irregular, that have those normal irregular endings. So over here, I'm going to draw a little divider so that we have a kind of organized paper. Let's just start off with doing our verbs. The first one is the verb être. So I'm going to draw my little table chart for you. And then in with the verb être, we're going to conjugate it as soit. So we've got soit, soit, soit. Now it changes to soyons and soyez and soit. Okay, our next verb is the verb aller. The verb aller in the subjunctive, I. I know it looks nothing like how it should be pronounced, but it just wouldn't be French if it was pronounced how it looks. Okay, so we have I, allions, allier, and I. So everything inside this boot is pronounced I. Hopefully that'll help a little bit. Okay, our next verb is the verb avoir. So majority of these irregular verbs are irregular in the present tense too. So avoir is a, ayant, ayez, and a. Again, everything inside that boot is all pronounced the same as a. All right, we've got one more verb, and that is the verb faire. Okay, the verb faire starts off with face. Face. face, fassion, facier, and face. So these verbs are quite irregular in stems that you probably have never seen before. And everything's pronounced face inside that boot. Okay? Those are all of the irregular verbs that I want to talk to you about right now in French 3-4-5 with the subjunctive. We're going to get into more later on, but for right now, this is a good place to start. If you're curious about other irregular verbs, always let me know. I'd be happy to send you more activities, more irregular verbs if you just want to pursue French more. But this is a good start. These are some major verbs that you'll use frequently. So that's why I like to start with this list. Okay, so just a quick review about the irregular verbs that we talked about. We talked about two stem verbs such as boire, venir, and devoir. Then we talked about all irregular verbs, meaning they have irregular endings and irregular stems with être, aller, avoir, and faire. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à envoyer moi un email. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email. Mais c'est tout pour aujourd'hui et à plus!